Welcome to the Deep Dive. Okay, today we're really getting into a vital and, well, often tough period in American history. We're looking at African American resilience and resistance, roughly between 1800 and 1848. Our goal here, our mission with this deep dive, is to try and understand the big continuities, but also the really striking changes in the African American experience then. We'll be exploring all the different strategies, for keeping dignity, holding families together, pushing for change, all while facing just immense systemic hardship. And the core of it today, I think, is this really stark contrast. On one hand, you have this pervasive systematic effort to dehumanize people designed to just crush the spirit. But then meeting that head on, you see this widespread, really tenacious resistance in so many forms. It wasn't just a few big moments. It was constant. Little daily acts right up to major rebellions. We've pulled together some insights from some really powerful historical sources that shed light on this incredible period. But first, to really get the strength of the resistance, we have to face the sheer brutality of slavery itself. It wasn't just about physical chains, was it? It was this deliberate psychological warfare. White slaveholders actively painted enslaved people as, well, less than human, more like farm animals. You actually hear that phrase, all to justify owning people and, incredibly, even claiming they somehow benefited from being enslaved. It's just mind-boggling.
It really is. And what's fascinating, in a really dark way, is how that whole dehumanizing story they built up became harder and harder for them to actually maintain. Because every act of resistance, big or small, just chipped away at that lie. It forced them to confront the very humanity they were trying to deny. You can imagine the kind of internal conflict that created. It showed how unstable their whole system was, morally bankrupt. And this constant pushback, it inevitably led to more fear, more repression, especially after big rebellions. You see slaveholders reacting with, well, sheer panic sometimes, leading to much stricter controls, doubling down.
Right. So it wasn't just some vague fear floating around. It turned into actual laws, actual changes in daily life.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Concrete examples are everywhere, and they got much worse after major uprisings. Look at what happened after Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, down in Virginia. Okay, the rebellion itself was violently put down, but that wasn't the end of it. It sent this wave of panic across the South, and the response, harsher slave codes, much harsher. Suddenly, teaching an enslaved person to read or write, illegal. The idea being, an informed mind is a dangerous one. They even outlawed marriage between enslaved people. Think about that, attacking the family unit itself. And they basically shut down any access to the courts. No legal standing, zero. And beyond just the laws, there was this intensified push to suppress any kind of unique cultural expression. This fear, it was often fueled by things like the Haitian Revolution, which had shown what organized Black resistance could actually achieve. So yeah, these restrictions touched everything, how people gathered, what they could sing, what they could say. It wasn't random. It was a systemic, coordinated effort to maintain absolute control, to snuff out any spark before it caught fire.
It's almost hard to wrap your head around the lengths they went to, suppressing basic human rights. Even just self-expression. You'd think that kind of pressure would just crush people's spirits entirely.
Yeah.
But it didn't always work that way, did it?
No, it's incredible, really. It speaks volumes about the human spirit. That pressure didn't crush hope. Often it just redirected it, sometimes into even bolder forms of resistance. Because this period, it wasn't only about those quiet, everyday acts of defiance, though those were vital, don't get me wrong. It also saw some incredibly brave, overt rebellions that just sent shockwaves through the whole system. And what's really striking is the sheer ingenuity, the courage it took to assert your humanity when the odds were so stacked against you, often facing near certain death.
So let's talk about some of those major organized rebellions. They must have terrified the slaveholding class.
Absolutely terrified them. And they demonstrated that unwavering desire for freedom. Take the German Coast Uprising, 1811 Louisiana. This was huge. We're talking hundreds of enslaved people. They got hold of whatever weapons they could, axes, hoes, a few guns. They organized themselves like little companies, even wore makeshift uniforms, and they marched toward New Orleans. Their goal was freedom, overthrowing the system. Now, it was put down pretty quickly by the militia, brutally so, but it's still the largest slave revolt in U.S. history. It put the fear of God into white planters, showed that organized resistance was always a possibility, simmering just below the surface.
Wow, hundreds marching like that, even with basic tools, that shows incredible coordination, a shared goal.
It absolutely does. Then skip forward 2 decades, 1831, you have Nat Turner's rebellion. Turner was a preacher, deeply religious, believed he was chosen by God to lead his people out of bondage. He organized this uprising in Southampton County, Virginia. Around 60 white people were killed. As we mentioned, the backlash was immediate and severe. Harsher laws, brutal reprisals, it entrenched the system further in some ways. But Turner himself, he became this potent symbol of radical resistance. His name alone struck fear into slaveholders and, gave hope to the enslaved. He became a legend.
And these weren't just happening in the Deep South, right? You mentioned resistance spread further.
That's a key point. Slavery and the fight against it wasn't confined to just the white-dominated South. Think about the 1842 revolt in the Cherokee Nation. This was an Indian territory. Enslaved people owned by Cherokee planters rose up. It shows how complex this institution was, crossing cultural and political lines. It reminds us the struggle for freedom wasn't monolithic. It happened in different places, with different groups involved.
And even on the high seas, impacting international law. The Amistad Mutiny, 1839. That's such a famous case.
An incredible story. It starts with enslaved Africans, led by Sengbe Pai, or Joseph Cinque, on a Spanish ship off Cuba. They revolt, kill the captain and cook, take control, and demand to go home, back to Africa. They end up captured off Long Island, and it sparks this huge legal fight in the U.S. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and none other than former President John Quincy Adams argues for the Africans, brilliantly. And in 1841, the court rules they're free. Says they were illegally enslaved and allows them to return to Africa. It was a massive deal. Highlighted the international side of slavery, challenged its legitimacy globally. A rare, huge legal win that inspired abolitionists everywhere.
It's just astonishing, the range of resistance. Outright rebellion, complex legal challenges, but it wasn't only those dramatic moments. There were also these really powerful movements happening in political activism, in print culture, especially from free Black communities. These seem crucial for challenging slavery intellectually, for asserting Black identity in public.
Precisely. And these often grew out of the very precarious spaces that free Black communities managed to carve out. Even though those spaces were always under threat, always policed, think about someone like James Forten in Philadelphia. Just a remarkable person. He was a free Black man, a sailmaker, incredibly skilled, built a very successful business, became quite wealthy. But Forten didn't just sit on his wealth. He used his economic independence as a tool for political action. He became a major leader in abolitionist movements, civic groups. He wasn't just fighting slavery, he was demanding voting rights, civil liberties for free Blacks. He funded newspapers, organized meetings, used his connections. It shows how economic power, when they could get it, could fuel political agency.
And speaking of newspapers, that brings us to Freedom's Journal. That must have been a monumental step.
Oh, a critical milestone, absolutely. Founded in New York, 1827, Samuel Cornish and John B. Russwurm. This was the first African-American owned and edited newspaper in the country. Think about that. Before this, Black voices were either missing from the media or completely distorted by it. Their motto was, "Righteousness exalteth a nation." It showed their purpose. It wasn't just newsprint, it was a platform, a vital space to directly fight racist ideas, push for abolition, and maybe most importantly, connect Black communities across different states. It covered news, local, national, international, published stories about successful Black individuals, ran powerful editorials arguing for freedom, justice, self-determination from a Black perspective. It really helped build a shared identity, a shared sense of purpose in the struggle, gave a collective voice to people who were systematically silenced.
That's so powerful. But what also strikes me, looking at this whole period, is something maybe less overt, but just as profound. Even under these horrific conditions, these constant attempts to dehumanize, African Americans actively built and maintained their own rich social identities, their own vibrant cultures. It wasn't just about fighting against slavery. It was about building something for themselves. That feels like a deep form of self-determination.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, this cultural preservation, it was arguably one of the most powerful types of inner resistance. It was crucial. It stopped the narrative that the Black experience under slavery was just totally defined by white masters and their rules. It was about holding on to your humanity, your self-worth, keeping that vital link to your heritage, even when the system tried to erase it all. It sustained community, it sustained hope. And that was essential for survival and for fueling other forms of resistance too.
So how did that actually look in daily life? What kinds of cultural practices became these acts of resistance?
You see this inner resistance in so many ways, in community building, in everyday life. Take naming practices, for instance. Okay, so a slave owner buys someone, gives them an English name. That's a mark of ownership, right? But for generations, among themselves, many enslaved people kept using their African names or names drawn from their heritage. This wasn't just, a preference. It was a deeply meaningful act, a way to hold on to cultural memory, community history, despite all the efforts to wipe it out. A quiet but firm statement of who they really were. Language and oral traditions, too. Hugely important. When they were together, away from the overseer's watch, people kept alive elements of West African or Caribbean languages, and they passed down folk tales. Stories often had trickster figures, like Brer Rabbit, who'd outsmart bigger, more powerful enemies. These stories might seem simple, but they often carried hidden meanings, survival tips, subtle digs at the masters, and of course, music and dance. These were huge outlets for self-expression, totally separate from the owners, often full of African rhythms, movements, keeping that connection to ancestral lands alive.
Turning everyday things into acts of survival, cultural survival. It's
Yeah.
really inspiring. And religion must have played a massive part in this as well.
Oh, absolutely. Religion is another fascinating area of this inner resistance, especially religious syncretism.
Mm.
You had some enslaved people, like the incredible Omar ibn Said. He was a highly educated Muslim scholar from Senegal, enslaved in North Carolina. He kept practicing Islam, praying to Allah, performing rituals. That shows the persistence of African intellectual and spiritual traditions. Then others really embraced Christianity, but they didn't just take it wholesale as the masters taught it. No way. Often they followed powerful black preachers who blended African cultural elements with American ones. They brought in drums, call and response singing, expressive dancing. They reinterpreted Christian stories, focusing hard on themes like liberation, justice, the Exodus story, Moses leading his people out of bondage. They basically took a religion that was often used to control them and turned it into this powerful source of hope, community, and even coded messages about freedom. They made it their own, a weapon of spiritual defiance.
And specific places became important too. Spaces where this culture could actually be lived out.
Definitely. Designated cultural spaces were absolutely vital. Centers for community, resistance, sometimes education and organizing, too. Think of the African Meeting House in Boston, built in 1806. It's the oldest black church building still standing in the U.S. But it was way more than just a church. It was a hub for abolitionism, for education, for political action in New England. They held anti-slavery talks, had literary societies, pushed for black civil rights. And down in New Orleans, you had Congo Square, a really unique, vibrant public space. For a lot of this time, enslaved and free black people were actually allowed to gather there on Sundays. It became this incredible incubator of cultural preservation. People played music on traditional African instruments. They danced with this amazing energy. They traded goods. It was a living, breathing continuation of African traditions, the rhythms, the movements the community feel. It profoundly shaped black identity and, frankly, American culture later on, all against incredible odds. It was a space where, just for a few hours, they could reclaim a piece of their heritage, assert their collective identity.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean for us today? As we finish this deep dive, we've seen this incredible duality, haven't we? On one side, just brutal, pervasive dehumanization between 1800 and 1848. And on the other, this powerful, multifaceted, deeply human resistance meeting it head on. From those big, dramatic rebellions that scared the oppressors, right down to the quiet, but just as profound, acts of keeping culture alive, building community. We've seen the whole range. It really underscores this enduring spirit, incredible creativity, and just an unyielding will to survive, to claim dignity, to chase freedom, even when things seemed impossible. It's a powerful story. Human dignity refusing to be extinguished.
It really is. And this raises, I think, an important question for you listening right now. How does understanding all these different kinds of resistance in the early republic, the big ones, the small ones, the spiritual, the cultural, how does that challenge or maybe deepen how you think about what freedom and power really mean? Not just back then, but maybe even now. It's a reminder, isn't it, that real strength isn't always just in the loud, visible fight. Sometimes it's in the quiet, tenacious, everyday work of just holding on to your humanity when everything around you is trying to strip it away.